Welcome to Supercool, the show about real-world climate solutions that cut carbon, boost the bottom line, and improve modern life. Each week on Supercool, we go behind the headlines to pinpoint the stories and data, accelerating the low-carbon economy in towns and cities across the U.S. and around the globe. I'm your host, Josh Dorfman. If you're enjoying the show, please take a quick moment to tap the follow button on top of your screen to make sure you receive all of our episodes. In 2007, I was sitting in my modern design sustainable furniture showroom in Brooklyn for my company called Vivavi. That showroom also happened to be my apartment, which I'd been living in for the past 3 years. I was super passionate about the idea of sustainable products that were so beautifully designed, you'd want them even if you didn't care about the planet. And I was willing to endure quite a lot to bring that concept into fruition. Basically, I lived in my business all the time. I'd wake up in the morning, take a shower, spruce the place up, and hang the open sign on the front door. It was a very New York way to build a business. Since real estate was so expensive, you had to find ways to make things work. For me, that meant sleeping in a bed that was also actually for sale. It worked out pretty well, but occasionally I'd hear a client or a customer whisper, "I think somebody lives here." And then I'd turn and see one of my dirty socks in the corner. Business was pretty good, but I was getting exhausted, facing burnout that confronts many entrepreneurs and startup founders. So one day the phone rings and my sales manager picks up. I heard her say, 10 scrap pile benches going to 1 Yum Way, something, Kentucky. She hung up and looked at me wide-eyed. Scrap pile was a Brooklyn furniture line made from discarded scraps sourced from the local Steinway piano factory. It was super cool, absolutely beautiful, totally unique, and expensive. That sounds like a $20,000 order, I said to her. Who lives at 1 Yum Way? Not who, she said. What? Okay, what's at 1 Yum Way? I asked her. That would be Kentucky Fried Chicken, she said. Kentucky Fried Chicken wants 10 scrap pile benches, I asked. No, they want 20,000, she said. The first 10 are just samples for review. My head started swimming. That's $20 million, I said, somewhat in disbelief. Yep, she replied, smiling, so what do you want to do? And the answer practically leapt right out of my mouth. Well, that's easy, I said. Retire. It turns out that order for 20,000 benches never actually came to fruition. But the scale of Kentucky Fried Chicken's operations and what it could mean for our small, sustainable business and the planet was certainly impressed upon me. On today's show, we're talking with another sustainable business that understands the magnitude and scale of franchises like KFC. And they're leveraging that scale to build one of the fastest growing businesses in America, a company that shows up regularly on the Inc. 5000 list. We're speaking with Al Sabloui, founder and CEO of Budderfly, an energy-as-a-service business that makes restaurant franchisees, fitness center owners, and others an offer they simply can't refuse. Zero money down, energy efficiency upgrades that modernize equipment, lower costs and carbon, streamline operations, and improve conditions for guests and employees. Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, that's what I thought until I read about fast food franchises on Long Island that have become Budderfly customers. What do they get for free? State-of-the-art HVAC systems, lighting, refrigeration, and more. Budderfly provides all the upfront capital and does all the work to install and maintain the equipment. It takes a cut of the savings generated from massive energy efficiency upgrades, which can lower energy use by 30 to 35%, if not more. In so doing, Budderfly puts businesses that we don't normally equate with climate leadership on the front lines of sustainable innovation. Businesses like your local McDonald's, IHOP, Burger King, Wendy's, Popeyes, and in total, over 40 brands. Today, Budderfly serves over 7,000 buildings with annual revenues of over $200 million. The beauty of Budderfly's business is that every dollar the company earns comes from boosting energy efficiency, which means cutting carbon. To date, Budderfly has raised close to $1 billion to make the business model and the economics work. It's a model that gets even better and more impactful with scale, as Al Sabloui and I talk about today. Here's our conversation. welcome to Supercool.
Thanks, Josh. Glad to be here.
Okay, so the first moment I discovered Budderfly and knew that I wanted to speak with you, I was reading about a handful of Popeyes franchises. And I'm reading how these franchisees have updated, all of the appliances. They're modernizing their facility. They're becoming super energy efficient. Budderfly is helping them do this. And I'm reading and I'm thinking, what? Like, how are Popeyes fast food franchises suddenly on the cutting edge front lines of sustainability is one. And then two, who in their right mind wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know what I want to do today? I want to go green some Popeyes franchises out on Long Island. Like, that is a special kind of company and a special kind of person. So anyway, thank you for joining us, but take us back. Like, Budderfly, where did the idea come from? I know it's evolved, but tell us a little bit about your founding story.
Well, Josh, I appreciate that. It was an exciting time. First of all, I love building companies. Listen, we're having fun right now because we've obviously grown a lot. It starts out with the problem. Everybody agrees there's a 30% waste factor in almost every facility. And yet, the world begins to end. And I'm like, well, this is crazy. Like, and why are people paying for solar to power something you don't even need? So that drove me crazy to a point where I began to explore why that was the case, because it doesn't make any sense. We as people have built technology to solve that 30% problem. If we took 30% out of every facility in this country, I don't think we'd have a climate change problem. So I would ask myself, what's the problem in the market? And honestly, most of the business models have too much friction, and that friction causes people that may not understand how to do this not to do it. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. So I whiteboarded a business model that removed all the friction to make it simple to get the job done. And it can be a profitable model for everybody. And at the same time, we can save the world. That's what drove me in the beginning to do it. And I also saw the business opportunity. But at Budderfly, we really like the fact we're helping the environment at the same time, doing both of those. It's hard to build a company where you can do both.
You built what was a very successful company before that, Tango? Do I have
Yes,
that?
that's correct.
Okay.
Telecom expense management.
Okay. So this idea of technology as a service, that's something that you were familiar with. You had a frame for being able to look at, at what Budderfly does today. And I'm going to ask you to talk through how you work with clients, what that looks like, what you come in and do. But it certainly does seem to me, and we've seen this in some other aspects of the economy where climate solutions are scaling, that figuring out that value proposition, like you started to allude to, where you can go into a business and say, I can solve some serious pain for you guys, some cost. I can help upgrade and modernize your facility. And it's zero money down. Like, you don't have to pay anything up.
Right.
Walk us through that. Walk us through the Budderfly value proposition and the product. And maybe we'll talk to kind of in there or tack onto that is like, how did you think of that? Like, because you're the only ones I really see doing this at the scale that you're doing it, in the market you're doing it.
Well, like any other answer to a question like that, given it was in my head and I was thinking through it, I'm going to do my best to try to say why. Coming off of the last company, Tango, with an expense management mentality, which looked at companies who spent a lot on telecom and the ability to drive 20% cost savings out of that expense category, was probably the beginning of looking at energy in a very similar way. Now, I'd say in 2017, when we built the model here, I always say this, the world was beginning to have a big focus on climate change, right? And by the way, Josh, I'm a really big believer in building businesses for really important drivers for people, because that's what people make decisions on. And really two big drivers. One is you save money, and two is you save the world at the same time. By the way, you get them both. Whether you want them both or not, doesn't matter. You get them in equal form, and we built the model. So it's actually quite simple. If you think about it, the solar market was driven off of a similar value prop, where there was a capital expenditure required to do something different source of power. And the only way they could make that work was to spread the benefit out over, a while ago it was 25 years, it's come down to 20, maybe 15. So in a way, all we really did at Budderfly is we took a portfolio of things. Now, we had to study all of them to make sure that they actually could produce a return based on the investment you make for every one of them, and call it for now 10 to 20 different things, and I'll categorize those for you in a minute. If you invest in those things, what's the return that they will produce in reduction in energy? How many dollars will that save relative to how much you spent to buy it, plus some cost of money? So I came up with the idea because solar, to me, translated to 10 to 20 different things to reduce consumption to get at that problem, which was the 30%. So I began to model, and I said, okay, if we put in a brand new HVAC unit, oh, by the way, what's the efficiency of a modern, highest efficiency HVAC unit you can buy? And it's 21, 23, 24 SEER IEER. Well, what does that mean? Well, I studied, right? And what are we replacing? And I realized we're replacing an 11 or a 12 that degraded to an 8. And when you do that math, you're going to save 50% to invest in that new HVAC. So it goes into the model, right? And how many years would it take for us to get that IRR to be able to justify spending the money to go do all this? And that's where we came up with a 10-year term. Now, we also have trouble because some of the things that we make as people don't last longer than that, right? So there's a life cycle. A lot of people say, oh, I did LEDs, I'm done. Well, you're done until they get yellow because they don't last forever. And a lot of people buy a 5-year light, which years 6, 7, and 8, they're starting to yellow. You're going to have to buy brand new LEDs. Now, if you do that, you get another 30% reduction because we as people built higher efficacy LEDs every 4 or 5 years. So I began to realize that this layer, what I call the energy infrastructure of a facility, which is made up of lighting and refrigeration and HVAC and controls and metering, we would go into business to outsource the whole thing. Because it's a little complicated, right? All the studying and the reading we were doing isn't easy for an owner of a restaurant, or frankly, the owner of any kind of company isn't going to do all that. So by the time we modeled it, I realized that in a 10-year term, we could invest in all the things that they would not invest in, and we could create an economic model where everybody wins. And then, of course, like any other business, Josh, you start to do it, you have to prove that out. You know, we even included sub-metering, and we pay for all of it behind the meter so that we can make sure that these equipment investments are doing what the world says they're going to do on paper. Our model is a highly measurable model where we measure the before, the after, and then the outcomes of every day for 10 years. So that's how we came up with it. I will tell you that when I discovered the notion of the concept, I got pretty excited because I looked around and I said, nobody has done this. And to this day, how many years later, still nobody has done it.
Right. Let's say, for example, I've got a McDonald's franchise, and Budderfly approaches me and says, we have an opportunity for you. We believe we have an opportunity for you. You've mentioned HVAC, you mentioned lighting, you've mentioned certain controls, but what does that look like?
So I try to start high level and I drill down. I think anyone, the takeaway will be there's categories of energy, equipment, use cases. HVAC is a category, all right, because HVAC is inclusive also of a smart thermostat or a dumb thermostat. It's not just the HVAC units. A typical McDonald's has about 3 units, and they'll have about 30 tons of units. These are big units. They're not like the ones at our house, right? But they are rooftop units. They come in with a crane. We can install 3 in 4, 5, 6 hours. We'll come in early, etc. The other category is lighting. And lighting's not just lighting. It's indoor lighting, outdoor lighting, kitchen lighting, where the customer is. And what we've learned there is that a lot of restaurants have taken care of their customer, but they might not have done the kitchen. We're still looking at a 40% penetration requirement in the restaurant industry where they actually haven't even done an LED, believe it or not. Then you got outdoor lighting. And you've got controls that can dim it, turn it on, turn it off. Refrigeration is a category into itself, right? You've got these big walk-ins. Average restaurant, I'd say between 15 and 22% of the energy use is coming out of refrigeration. So these big chunky categories of use. The older brands, of which many brands in this country are, the average age of their HVAC units is between 12 and 18 years, average. Now, they're sitting on some that are 25, 28 years old. And I know the customer never goes on the roof, but we do, and I do. And you should see what's up on that roof. It's not what you'd like to see. In the building and the cool air has been coming out, you're happy, you're fine. And when do you replace that? you only replace it when it dies. And then often you don't even replace it. You buy a new compressor because it's cheaper. Now, we come in and we say, wait a minute, we have, as people, developed these very high efficient units. We could drive 50% out of the use of those HVACs. We're replacing right now about 80%, not upgrading, with things called VFDs and economizers and efficient components. We're putting a brand new unit up there because that unit is a higher tech unit today than it was 15 years ago. Minute we turn it on and we pop it in, we put a thermostat that's connected, we can drive 50% out of that equipment, which is probably almost 30% of the restaurant's use, is just cooling and heating. And then lighting, gotcha. We will replace, if it's 5 years old, brand new, beautiful lighting. So a customer comes in and says, wow, this is a crisp restaurant. I feel pretty good about this. We put on controls on refrigeration units that are smarter about the way compressor runs run. And I could go on. The door stays open more than 40 minutes. You get alarms. There's all things you can do. It all adds up to roughly about 30%.
Gotcha. You're growing so fast. You're in all of these different types of businesses. How do you manage your supply chain? How do you get access to equipment? How do you make sure that you're actually doing this in a timely basis? Because you're in so many different markets now, different types of businesses, different types of equipment. And then I read how you had signed a deal, I believe, with Carrier, the global HVAC company, to get access to be able to purchase the world-class, highest quality kind of, whether it's refrigeration equipment, HVAC equipment, that these businesses on their own would never have access to.
Correct.
Right? And so I'm curious about your supply chain. And then I read about how you acquire SunVerge earlier this year, and I'm going to ask you about virtual power plants, what that means in your business. We've touched on it in some previous episodes of Supercool, but very interested in how you're getting access to great equipment because of your scale. SunVerge, you're thinking about virtual power plants across multiple locations and really going to drive value because of your scale. You prove your model, you prove that you can do these reductions, you prove that there's a revenue stream for you, you go out, you raise hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to offer the zero money down financing, right, because of your scale. Right. And so what I see is a business that's great to begin with, but really starts to achieve massive wins for the climate, but also massive economic gains by virtue of scale, right? The real economics come into play the bigger that you can grow this business, right? Is that a fair thing? Okay. Yep. And that's where it kind of goes to my question of like, did you see that on day one? Or was this kind of like, oh, right, this piece. We're building this behemoth that's really changing the world right now and having this huge impact, and because we're going to scale this thing so big.
So you should have been in the room in 2017. You're a good straight man for it. This is my third major rodeo, okay? I have as many stripes on my shoulders as I have scars on my back, just so you know. And I will tell you that it is the most deliberate model I've ever been involved in. And yes, the scale was all part of the strategy. There were a few unexpected turns, and I'll share some of those with you. It bothers me, again, that this whole climate change thing that gets discussed and debated, and solar is the answer and EV is the answer. And I'm like, we're spending capital to power a kilowatt we don't even need to use. That's really dumb.
Just elaborate on that. I know you touched on it in the beginning. Just to elaborate on that a little bit more.
I don't think a lot of people will debate this. You might debate the exact percent. That there's about a 30% waste factor in almost every facility in this country.
Why?
Think of the friction points I shared with you.
Yeah.
HVAC is almost a third of that entire problem. Anywhere, even in your home. You don't go out and replace your HVAC every 10 years.
Okay, I got it. Right.
You will replace its compressor because it's only $1,000 or $3,000. Right. And you're like, I don't care. It just runs. You're not sitting there saying, wait a minute, I can get a 50% reduction in my energy bill. And even if you hear that, you don't believe it, and you have no way to measure it, manage it. And that utility bill is the worst designed document by humans ever. So you look at it for a minute, you put it down, and you pay it on the bottom, right? So that whole environment was the reason why this is a problem. And, we decided to build a company to outsource the problem, take it on and own it. Let's shift to the supply chain. A lot of strategy around this. And, it takes some guts to do it. You say to yourself, all right, should we own the supply chain? Should little old Budderfly that I made up that I didn't spell right with 2 Ds, right? Who the heck are we to own this massive supply chain? And if we're going to replace 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 commercial rooftop units and heat pumps. That's going to take a lot of money, right? Well, here's what I learned. The market has a problem. There's a margin on margin on margin problem. And, I don't think we did it on purpose, but you have a distributor who buys from the big manufacturer, Carrier, Trane, or Lennox, or Daikin, or York. So they put a markup on it. Then they decide to sell it to the local HVAC installer. Well, they have to put a markup on it. By the time you get it, you're paying a lot of margin. We go out and we buy, 3,000 of these things, and we spend 20, 30, $40 million on it. And we get like a 40, 50% discount. So we come in, and by the way, we don't sell anything, Josh. You don't pay me a margin on anything. I put it in at cost. So we're able to now invest in this equipment at a rate that will help humans in climate change in a way that's less than what they're going to pay for a less efficient type thing today in the retail markets. And the scale that we do means we got to buy thousands. We got to store them, logistics, we got to ship them, we've got to order them right. And it's taken a couple of years to get good at that. We also needed to raise a ton of money. So we've raised about $1 billion.
Right.
Of course, everybody gets to make money on this because if you do the math and you get good at it, you realize this is a premise that'll work for everyone. So I felt like Budderfly needed to own the supply chain. So we do own that. We do outsource the installation most of the time. And that's had its level of challenges, as you could probably guess. So we've been certifying people, training, quality assurance, and we have people that manage the end goal, but we do outsource a lot of the installation. Those decisions along the way were important to get to scale. Right now, our plan has us doing about $1 billion in revenue in 2028.
Mm-hmm. And you guys are at
pretty big.
And you're around 200 million. I think I read it.
We just crossed 200 recurring run rate.
200,
just crossed it.
Yeah.
End of next year will be well over 300. We're growing at put a number in your head, roughly a 50% long-term top-line growth rate. Gets harder when you're $500 million to grow at 50%. The number gets really big.
Yeah.
But that's fun, right?
Absolutely. So that's the supply chain. I was very curious about that, especially when you're working with new buildings, new restaurants, new chains. You're growing so fast, right? We're talking about thousands and thousands of, or maybe hundreds of installations a month. I don't know what the number is, but it's a lot, and it's dispersed. Like you're doing this all over the country.
We're in all 50 states.
Talk to me about the acquisition of SunVerge, and how do you think about this concept? People are just starting to hear this thing, virtual power plant, and wondering, what the heck does that even mean? And we've talked about it in Utah, where there's a lot of solar plus residential storage, and the utility there is involved in it. We had this guy, Marshall Gobudi, on. I don't know if you guys ever crossed paths, who did Hunters Point down in Florida, the zero energy development. He's trying to get to a virtual power plant. But in your space, when I'm thinking about fast food franchise restaurants and health centers and fitness centers and all the places where you guys go in and you say, well, we're going to acquire this company out of San Francisco that's a leader in distributed energy resource management. That's another term people are like, what the heck is that? And we're going to run this thing at scale for the middle market, all these mid-market businesses. What does that mean? What's the upside? What are you trying to accomplish?
Let me be clear on a point. I've allowed us to be a bit pigeonholed into looking like an energy efficiency player. And I really have allowed it. And why? Because we're being incredibly successful. It's easy to understand. When the model was created, if you think about it, we've almost built a virtual utility behind the meter. And nobody's ever done that before. So let me give you the high level view of it. If you look at energy in general, you got the demand side and you have the supply side. In today's world, and this got architected 100 years or more ago, it's a supply-driven infrastructure in the energy world, which means the world builds these big centralized power plants, and they had to put all this money into the wires to get those electrons to the facility. And the funny part to me is the more important aspect of that demand-supply equation is the demand side. If it wasn't for the demand, you'd have no supply. And it's the demand side that's creating all of the use case. It's what is now with data centers creating more demand than we have supply, which then leads to potentially blackouts, problems, price increases, et cetera. And it's funny because nobody really said, I'm going to become the leader on the demand side of that whole curve. Now, if you buy into that with me, it's not just lowering the use on the demand side, it's being able to manage it better. If I have the ability to have about a 20, 30, 40% flex on that demand side at any moment in time. And through software, I'm able to do that. All of a sudden, I can get rid of peaker plants that are out there when there's a high demand. That Budderfly sits here in a city, and let's say we have 1,000 restaurants, and the utility in 1 minute from now needs 20 megawatts of power immediately. We could take 1 degree off of 1,000 places, and all of a sudden we deliver that to the utility because a data center needs it. Well, let me put a storage battery in there, right? And if we don't mind paying for it, all of a sudden I put a 150 kilowatt storage battery. Not only can I give you 1 degree, I could basically have that dispatch on 1,000 storage batteries anytime you need it. So all of a sudden, Budderfly becomes this powerful demand side manager of all this power. And you could argue our power is more flexible than the supply side has today. So when we did the SunVerge deal, they have specialized software, because this is complicated, right? To be able to know when and how and all that. We now have control of all the equipment in these places. And again, we don't want to affect their operations. So whether the freezer is 0 degrees or 2 degrees, it doesn't matter to the food. The food is happy, no matter which.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But our control position in this market for the benefit of doing better for the world is the most important value, I believe, of what we created at Budderfly.
Okay, I'm digesting that. Let me say some of that back to you to make sure that I have it right. You had an understanding. We're going to go in. We're going to provide energy as a service. We're very happy to be known as an energy efficiency company, because we're going to save all these companies a lot of energy. We're going to share in the benefits and in the upside of that. Like, it's a better experience overall for everyone, workers, customers, et cetera.
Correct.
Right. The self-interest aligns with your business model in that sense.
Correct.
Right. Okay. All right. So now you're in. And I love what I've heard you say, kind of your land and expand strategy. Let's go into a franchise. Let's do a great job for a couple of facilities. Let's have other franchisees or corporate headquarters find out about all the good work, the savings that's happening, and say, hey, right, expand, like do this across our fast food chain, our fitness chain, whatever. Like I get that, makes a ton of sense. Now you bring in this layer that says, hey, we are in thousands of locations, and these locations are demanding energy. And we control the energy, and we can do this in a way where we can make it work for the utility. So instead of when the utility needs to spike energy because something's happening, they don't have to turn on natural gas peaker plants that are inefficient. That actually causes loads of carbon, right?
Correct.
It's expensive, right?
Correct.
And so we avoid that, and we can do this at a scale that no one's really even thinking about, and it enables you in many respects to be a massive partner to the utility. Does the facility itself, does that restaurant share in any of that upside with you, or what are the economics of that?
You have to make everyone win all the time. If there's a win, you share it. The other thing that's a rule here is it's transparent. Everybody is aware of all dynamics. And by the way, I'm not big on accepting definitions. Like I don't accept any definition. So if you and I were to define the concept of a utility, we would sit here and realize that it's a supply-driven model that pushes things to you. You're not exactly sure when they need it, and you have to be ready to give more, and you do your best to predict that, right? Are they responsible for your equipment? No. Well, that's interesting. It's an interesting question, right? If you and I were to whiteboard the demand-side utility and call it a virtual software-driven utility, how would we define that? Would we make that company a little more responsible for the equipment? And in the world of climate change, I think it should, right? Should we make that demand-side utility have flex power so that we have the ability to, in a flexible way, be able to respond to the supply-side utilities' needs? The answer is yes, right? But that doesn't exist today, which is an opportunity. I'm a little surprised the rest of the world didn't look at life in that more simplistic manner. But you can get paid to have flexible power. You tell me the value. And by the way, the utilities do this. The value of a kilowatt when they really need it is a lot more than the value of a kilowatt when they don't need it. So the timing where we place that becomes highly critical. Who better to do that than the folks that own the facility behind the meter like we do, including the billing, the economics, the equipment. And we've built software connection points to everything within that facility. We're driving right now about 4 billion data records a day out of 7,000 customers, because you need to be connected, right? This takes smart software to be able to pull out that kind of scale.
All right, I'm gonna be thinking about that tonight, probably again, 3 a.m. I'll be like, I'm awake. I wonder if Al's awake, probably just masterminding the next phase here.
Well, Josh, I've learned about the notion of melatonin as part of Budderfly. I will tell you that. That little subtle trigger to help you sleep at night, right?
Yeah, I think these things probably go hand in hand for you. I mean, what's awesome about Budderfly is climate impact is directly tied to revenue generation. The bigger the company gets, the more benefit to the environment. Yep. And obviously the benefits to all the businesses that have healthier, higher quality indoor environments too, which is additional benefit. But with this direct connection, like the more we grow the business, the more we're doing carbon reduction, the more we're putting all of these businesses on the front lines of sustainability with us that never really are there otherwise, right? We're doing this together, right? We have all these partners, which is incredibly exciting. How do you think about kind of total addressable market from maybe an installation perspective? How do you think about it from like an energy perspective? How do you think about your market and how big this can be?
I think about it all the time. You can already tell I'm a top-down thinker. If you're going to go after a TAM, you have to know what it is, and you have to have a strategy of how much of it you're going to pull out. So at a very high level, there's about 150 billion a year in electricity expense if you carve out some high production manufacturing plants. Okay, which isn't a fit for us. Mm-hmm. And we're targeting about 55 billion, about a third of it. Okay, and in those targets, food service companies are somewhere between 7 and 10 billion of that. And the reason they're higher is that at $10 to $20 a square foot versus a building at $2 a square foot, those little restaurants end up being a bigger part of the overall piece. You start to get into fitness centers, healthcare as an example, retail. It gets to about 55 billion. At a very high level, if you and I say we can take 30% carbon out of 55 billion, I believe that we would single-handedly be the largest savior and fixer of climate change. That's a big, big number. And I'm sitting here telling you that's available. I can even tell you how much it's going to cost to go get it. It's about 1.5 times the spend you're investing in. So very quickly, call it $100 billion. Now, maybe it would have been better, instead of doing the IRA, to just throw $100 billion at our business model, and we would have it solved by now. And, the other part of your point, and I'm going to say it as best I can, when you're building a company, it's nice to have economics as a tailwind for what you're doing. The notion of climate change. I say to people, we built a model that perfectly aligns capitalism with carbon reduction. If you want to go to the cocktail party and say that I'm saving the world, go ahead. You have that. If you're one who doesn't believe in climate change, I'm going to convince you, well, it's not good to pollute the air with invisible gas. That's not good either, right? You almost get it for free here. And we're here to make money, have our customers make money, but we have a direct reflection on carbon reduction. I say this all the time. I never know who's in the room. There's always this ongoing debate in the world, which, if you're going to build a great company, put the debate aside. All right. That's why I very purposely drove economics to drive the saving of carbon reduction. They go hand in hand in our model, and we measure it right down to the kilowatt.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. It's fascinating. The best kind of climate solution is addressing customer pain in the real world. The best models, actually, the best value propositions are the ones that say, we're going to make this change so seamless for you. And in your case, Budderfly, it's like you don't have to lift a finger, right? We can't even make it, right? So you remove, and this is how we started the conversation, but you remove the friction, like right out of the gate.
Completely.
Taking friction out of this, right?
And the number one objection, that we teach our salespeople, this is too good to be true. What's the catch? That's the number one objection at Budderfly on the sales front for our company.
I get that.
Yeah, right, because people are like, well, this seems too good. They even ask, how do you make money, right? And we tell them. We do our best to tell them where it comes from.
Yeah, I get that, because your biggest competition is just inertia. Your biggest competition is just people getting used to this aspect of their business operations being suboptimal, right? Well, we're used to it. This is the way we always did it, right? And it's like, that's the objection you have to overcome.
Well, inflation has helped us. I didn't make inflation. So remember, I'm a jungle guy. I didn't make the jungle. Don't blame me for the jungle. Inflation has put a spotlight on expenses like never before. Okay. Increased wages to put a spotlight on energy expense, especially in the restaurant and retail industries. That has helped us because all of a sudden percentage points matter. And more importantly, people are realizing the equipment is aged. And we do have a lot of people who do want to save the world too. They do. They just don't want to spend, $300,000 to save the world.
Absolutely.
And we come in and say, we're going to do that, right?
So one of the things I was thinking about, Al, when I knew I was going to get a chance to talk to you and really digging into your business, thinking about the impact that you're having on the world today, the success of your business model, how fast you're scaling. Like you said, this is not your first rodeo. You've built other businesses before. You brought a lot of experience to what you're doing. I mentioned Marshall Gabodi on the show. He's in his 60s. He had an amazing career with Arizona Jeans and some things that are just in his history that are like, whoa, you did what? Now he's, a pioneer in building zero energy, world-class residential communities. And no one else in the industry, it took someone from outside the industry to do it.
Right.
We had someone on the show earlier, Lynn Mueller, was actually he's in his 70s now. He built a business called Shark, and they provide systems to buildings in Vancouver. It's actually a sewer heat recovery system. There's over 6,000 apartments that are being powered by heat for water, for space that's being just elegantly removed out of the sewer and funneled into the district heating system. But it took him like a whole career to suddenly be like, whoa. I could be like on a cruise ship just cruising around the world, but I'm actually going to go take a tour of like sewers in Albania and Beijing and figure this thing out because I have all this knowledge. Right? And what I see, and I think it's a trend that we see at Supercool, is many of the solutions, not just that are scaling so fast and are real world proven. It's not the typical, Facebook Zuckerberg, 20-something CEO, founder who like everyone wants to talk about that figures this thing out.
Right.
I find that there's a different entrepreneur, a different type of entrepreneur that is really succeeding and scaling ventures these days.
I'll be blunt about it. I don't come from the energy space at all. I literally. And I read my butt off like I do. It's just what I love to learn. I find it fascinating. But I also come in with a fresh set of eyes. And the energy space doesn't have that many folks that come necessarily from the outside. And by the way, it is an old line space. And even the equipment manufacturers, there's an element of, well, we're going to do it the way we did it yesterday. And I don't accept that. I don't care what age I am, right? I come from a world, I actually enjoy the disruption part. And I got to be careful because I'm not like a reckless, disruptive individual. I'm an ex-Accenture Anderson consulting guy. But I don't like to accept the way things are, often because that's the way they were. And in the energy space, there's a lot of that right now. So my last life, I wasn't from the telecom space either. The only difference then, maybe I was younger, is I never started that conversation with it. But when they asked me, I tell the truth, right? Because I said, oh, they're going to think I don't have experience. At Budderfly, I'm right up front now because obviously it works and it's worked a couple times for me, is I say, listen, I don't come from this space. I probably do now, Josh, because I've read so much. And that you have to be careful. I still have to be inventive, right? I still have to challenge the status quo that we do every day. I don't care what size you are. And I do that every day. I think my age has probably given me a lot of experience, to at least be able to build a model like this and know from the past what can work and what doesn't work, the economics of it, the profit models, the way you raise capital, who you raise it from. Because I've raised a lot of money in my day. That probably didn't hurt.
For sure. You've said the target is $1 billion business, 2028. So, it's just a few years down the road. You're scaling incredibly fast. What drives you? What's the biggest motivator for you to keep building it grow?
I played sports through college. They're my cherished moments. I love sports, and I've realized, and I've gotten clarity on your question, by the way. So I didn't have as much clarity 10, 20 years ago. Life is really a journey, and you realize that. You can't be destination focused all the time. So I love growing large teams of people, great people who care in ways to do things that others can't pull up. I find the intellectual stimulation of it, it is by far the most exciting that I like to do, to a point where you could probably tell I now have to take melatonin to go to sleep at night. Whether we're a billion, a half a billion, I have learned that the journey is where you find your satisfaction, not necessarily the destination. Companies that go on forever to be great, they keep going. You know, say that to Steve Jobs. I mean, he built Apple. Incredible story, right? But the company continues to succeed. There's a journey that still goes on there. We as people get older, whether we like to or not, that's the reality of it. But I find tremendous pleasure in the journey.
Al, I just want to thank you so much for speaking with us today. I'm a big fan, inspired by what you're doing with Budderfly. Excited to continue to watch your success.
No, Josh, thank you. Enjoyed chatting with you.